How many pieces of paper would you need?
2 contentions or 2. All right, so I strongly affirm the resolution that the Republic of Korea should significantly increase financial support for green bond issuance. To go straight into some definitions, the Republic of Korea, we are going to be assuming is South Korea. Green bonds are basically bonds that are used to pay for like environmentally friendly projects, often to help like mitigate the effects of climate change. And increased financial support is basically like the government doing something to like subsidize these types of bonds, making them more affordable, that kind of thing. And to go into our plan, which is basically to make climate change bonds tax exempt in South Korea. So in the status quo, there are no tax exemptions on the income you get from buying these climate change bonds, or these green bonds, and our plan is to make it tax exemptable, which is basically just a subsidy making like a more affordable, increasing financial support for these types of bonds. So to go into a little bit of background of like what these bonds are, so basically like people in Korea like can buy these bonds, and then the proceeds like from a bank, and the proceeds will go to like funding these types of projects that are used to pay for or like fund all sorts of investments and green eco-friendly projects. And the vast majority of all issuers is this like bank in Korea, private bank in Korea. Yes.
So what is the current tax on green bonds?
Well, there's no tax on it. It's just that it's factored into your income when you pay your taxes. So if we pass our plan, then basically you don't have to pay whatever you make on these green bonds as part of your income. It's tax deductible. Okay, going to the first contenders about the environment. Uniqueness one is that 30% of the proceeds, like in the status quo of these types of bonds, go straight to like renewable energy research, creating new types of renewable energy that are like affordable, that kind of thing. And 50% goes to funding like low carbon solutions for like transportation and buildings. And like the rest goes to like waste management, water management, those types of projects. So basically we see like almost all of the proceeds and all of this funding that is going to these green bonds, all the profit or all the like money that's going to these projects is to good things that help the environment and like renewable energy projects and that types of things. The uniqueness too is that in South Korea, 82% of their energy comes from fossil fuels. They're like lagging behind a lot of like top European countries. Like France only gets like 10% of their energy from fossil fuels, and basically, South Korea still gets a lot of their energy from fossil fuels, and this is going to do. To use my first link, this is basically a huge incentive for investment into these types of bonds. Basically, now that it's tax deductible, that more people are going to buy these bonds, more people are going to be incentivized to buy these bonds because they don't have to pay taxes on it, so they can have get more money from buying these bonds. To look at some examples around the world, like South Korea has only issued, since it started, $6 billion worth of these bonds, whereas China has issued like 81 billion and the US has issued 41 billion, and both those countries have some tax exemptions on those bonds. Yes.
In your plan, how much like more bonds will you sell? Like rough estimate.
Well, in this over the past I think like 6 years since it started, there's been $6 billion worth of bonds sold, and just like a rough estimate, there's really no way to like predict exactly how many more bonds can be sold, but this is a significant incentive that will roughly increase to maybe 10 or 15%. 10, 15, somewhere around there is going to be the increase in investment. So, like I said, the first link, there's a huge incentive for people actually to invest into these bonds. And okay, the second link is how South Korea is ranked as the most innovative economy in the entire world. So basically what we can see is that from all this investment, there's going to be huge amounts of innovation that will come from this investment. Is a worthy investment, because we know the companies in South Korea are the most innovative in the world. They have tons of innovations in the past. Yes?
Does South Korea make donations to nonprofits tax deductible?
I don't know the exact tax code of South Korea, but I'm pretty sure in most standard tax laws that donation to charity or tax deductible up to a certain amount. Sorry, I can't take this many POIs. So going to like I said, the second link is that it's the most innovative economy, meaning that this investment will actually pay off. We know that investing in these green projects is really going to be worth it, because South Korea is rated the most innovative economy. They're more have really high chance of coming out with new technologies and new sorts of things from this investment, which is basically good. So the impact of this was basically solving for all the effects of climate change, mitigating the effects of climate change, which the we're predicted to only have like 10 more years before we can fix the problem, and doing as much as we can, especially in Korea, to combat climate change, to develop new technologies, to incentivize people to invest in green bonds, to incentivize people to actually like start investing in green projects which will help decrease carbon emissions and find other renewable sources of energy to overall bring Korea's emissions down and overall help solving climate change. So we have all the impacts of climate change and mass extinction and all that, so we have a huge magnitude on this impact. Going into the second contention, which is that of the economy in South Korea. So unique to this one is that the economy is currently at the slowest rate it's been, like the growth rate is the slowest since the Great Recession in South Korea. Basically, this uniqueness too is that like South Korea, the central bank has cut interest rates like many times, and it's currently like 1.25%, which is some of the lowest it's ever been, meaning that like they're really trying to spur like investment, spur economic growth. And the third, like basically the inherency for this is that the trade war between China and the U.S. has had a huge like detriment on slowing the amount of investment in businesses within South Korea. It's kind of responsible for this like slow economic growth. So the links into this is that this will like create a huge like incentive for investment. Like I said, now these banks and like these companies will have more investment. People will invest because they have an incentive to buy these bonds. You'll see that the economy will overall benefit because like there's going to be more business growth. There's going to be more like innovation coming from this, and more of like the total economy will like benefit from having this additional investment by the people, because now there's an incentive to not having to pay taxes on whatever income you make from these bonds. The second link to this is that people will now like make more money off the bonds because more people are buying them, which means people have more buying power. People are more likely to reinvest it into the economy, more likely to spend it on themselves, spend it on a variety of things which will help the economy if people have more buying power. And in this case, they have a lot more buying power because they're first of all more incentivized to buy bonds, and secondly, they don't have to pay taxes on the bonds, meaning they have just more overall money to spend into the economy, which will benefit the economy. Like I said, is slowing because of lack of investment, and this will surely make up for that. So the links for this is that we're going to see like a significant economic growth in South Korea because of this. There's a huge amount of net benefits from people having like better jobs, people having better quality of life, people having more money to spend, people having more like generally freedom in their life to do, which is a net benefit. We're weighing, I forgot to set a standard, but standard is net benefits, and you should be weighing on like the people of Korea who are having more money to spend as more freedom, more happiness, better quality of life, and overall like businesses getting more investments. So overall what you can see is that making these green bonds, the profit from these green bonds tax exempt, will have a huge impact on creating more innovation to help the environment, which is the biggest impact in this round. The magnitude is bigger than anything else, but also we are solving for the like slow economic problems of the economy that are currently due to the trade war by increasing investment within all of South Korean businesses. So for these reasons, I strongly urge a vote for the affirmation.
One second.
So, first I'm going to go over our own case, because I believe that will clear up some things in today's debate and bring out some of my refutations before I get into their case. Okay, so so I'm just going to get it. We agree with their definitions, and we agree with their weighing mechanism of net benefits. So, saying that, I'm going to move into my first contention, which is the risks of going green. So subpoint A is the lack of liquidity. So the lack of liquidity is the largest detract. So basically, what happens is the bonds actually have no profitability, and being a small market, entering and exiting positions is not easy. And what this says is that no one has a real incentive to actually invest in bonds. Whether or not it is tax deductible does not create enough of an incentive, does not create an incentive to invest in these bonds, as they're not profitable, and so the bonds do not make sense to invest in. And
UK did the same thing, and people like to not invest because of the liquidity issue.
Yeah, so the United Kingdom has done the same thing, but people still didn't invest due to the same reason. Okay, so next I'm going into subpoint B, which is the lack of specificity. So the thing is that there's a lack of a clear definition. So our opponents provided the numbers that it's 30% to renewable, 50% to low carbon buildings and low carbon transportation, and 20% go into water management. Judge, what this tells me is that there's lack of a clear definition on it. And lots of this money, like lots of the green bonds, currently they go to buildings such as like monuments, and they go to building like company cars. So there's a lack of definition that basically makes green bond, so that drags down green bonds, yeah.
Like the system is like corrupt and broken, and they're supporting the broken system.
The system is currently broken. Our opponents are essentially supporting the system by incentivizing it. And next, our subpoint C is other risks. So other risks, like some that I mentioned before, are just basically that there's low yields. It's a very expensive market, and there are no profits from this market. And so and then next, another risk would be mispricing of these bonds. Another risk is that there's lack of research going on, and our opponents are going to invest straight into renewable sources. They're going to invest into low carbon building and transportation, whereas research is not happening. Next, our second contention is that of the private sector. So as of now, the private sector makes up 90% of all green energy worldwide. What this says is basically that this the government support will not make a difference on green bonds, as the private sectors are the ones that's going to be taken over. And even in that, our opponents stated that, when I asked the question, are donations to nonprofits tax deductible? They said they agreed that yes, they are tax deductible. So there are other ways to go about this rather than bonds, because the bonds will not bring about a profit. And next, I'm going to go into refuting our opponent's case. So first, we start off with their plan, which is basically to make a tax exemption. But Judge, our opponents are being a bit unclear on this. So essentially, our opponents said make a tax exemption, but then they go on and they also said that in the middle they said that it's actually tax deductible. So the government essentially takes that off, they take the money they invested off their taxes. But then they go back into how that they don't have to pay taxes on the bonds. So this is very unclear. And next, I'm going to move on into their first uniqueness, which was that of the 30% renewable and this whole variety bit. The problem with this whole variety bit is that there's a lack of specificity, a lack of definition. And so because of this, it's extremely hard and unprofitable to invest in these bonds. Next, our opponents go into how South Korea only issues like $6 billion worth of bonds, whereas China does $81 billion, the United States does $44 billion. But Judge, the South Korean government expenses only amount to $500 billion. So essentially, by proportionality, South Korea spends a lot more on proportion than China and USA in these bonds. And next, so basically our opponents, so in their second contention, they go into economy and how they have the slowest growth since recession. And central banks, they constantly cut their interest rates, and how if people buy bonds, investments will go up and the economy will go back to normal. But Judge, this is not true, and the reason this is not true are that bonds are not, these green bonds are not profitable. Thus, they do not create all these effects our opponents are saying. And next, they go into how the quality of life will increase if people have more buying power. But Judge, this is a huge stretch. The thing is that this also relies on the fact that they make a huge profit. That they make a huge profit off of it, but as I said, there will be no profits. And it's simply, as I say, it's not exactly it's not that there are no taxes on it. So this is a huge stretch, and we cannot go off of that.
The profitability comes from the fact like you can't make profit from like climate change, in which like government's been doing so.
Right. So climate change is not exactly a profitable sector. And next, so let's go into a couple impacts. So the first impact should be money. So basically, our opponents are essentially wasting money for a cause that will not occur, and it will not be helping our situations. Thus, it's a waste of money. And right. So another fact is that right now, like the government needs to pay over $1 trillion to help solve climate change, whereas they only have $577 billion in their entire budget. Thus, that'll lead to either a collapsing government or chaos.
The $1 trillion comes from the fact that they have to pay back the bonds that people invest in.
Yeah, so the $1 trillion essentially amounts to the fact that they have to pay off the bonds and solve all these issues, which is simply unsustainable and will either cause chaos or the downfall of the government or a huge backlash on the fact that their government is wasting money when the people will need it the most. And so, Judge, for all these reasons, I urge a negative vote.
Is everyone ready? All right, I'll begin. I'm going to start by going into the off case and then reaffirming our contentions. The first point they make is about the risk of going green. They say there is little incentive to invest in bonds there's a lack of clear definitions, that there's a corrupt system, that there's a bad market, and that there's no research. Judge, there are no links for any of these assertions. Let's address the little incentive to invest in bonds. They claim that bonds are unprofitable. My opponents don't seem to understand what a bond is. A bond is a slip of paper. It is a promise to pay back a loan with interest. A bond is issued by the Bank of of the Bank of South Korea to pay back an investor. The investor would buy it because the Bank of North or South Korea is paying an interest rate on this bond. The Bank of South Korea sells the bond. They have the money. Now, the investor will be paid back later. By making these bonds tax exempt, not only are they already profitable because interest rates are paid on them, albeit low interest rates, but they are increasingly profitable because we are making the profits from them tax exempt. I'll get to your question in a minute. My opponents seem to have missed the whole point where my partner said that the tax exemption goes on to the profits from the bond. So the holder of the bond gets the profits. They get the tax exemption. Now the holder of the bond gives the money to the government, who then has it to invest in the private sector and specifically in renewable energy. They say there is a lack of clear definitions, corrupt systems. I think my opponent gave some pretty clear definitions that we're investing in renewable energy. We are investing in low carbon technology, and that South Korea is behind the world in transforming its energy system and its economy toward a more sustainable market. And my opponents have said that there's a corrupt system, that this money is wasted. They provided no evidence, they provided no links for it, so we can default to our plan where these green bonds, under our definition, are invested into these things. They say that this is a bad market. They haven't really expanded on that or provided any evidence for this. They say there is no research into this, there's no research into the technology that we're investing in. Judge, by investing in the technology, by promoting the industry that creates this technology, there will be more research, there will be more innovation. As my partner said, South Korea is one of the most innovative, if not the most innovative country in the world. So by promoting the private sector that produces these low carbon technologies and renewable energy technologies, I'll get to your question in a minute, it will further research and innovation. Yeah.
So you stated, so this is, by the way, this is referring back to your, they make money argument. So wouldn't the government lose money because ultimately it comes out of their pocket?
Oh, absolutely, but according to modern monetary theory, the government can issue as much money as it wants. The government can continue buying money. The United States federal government is allowed to borrow as much money as it wants. It's called a treasury bond. When someone else buys a treasury bond, the United States federal government increases its revenue. And yes, theoretically, that would cause South Korea to go deep into debt, but it is worth it for the benefits that I will get into. And again, according to modern monetary theory, any country that has its own currency, so not the Eurozone, but South Korea, is allowed to spend as much money as it wants with little to no risk because it can print that money. Yeah.
Wouldn't your plan actually double the current deficit of South Korea?
That's not an issue. That is not an issue. Modern monetary theory states that a country that can print its own money can borrow as much money as it wants. Yeah.
Wouldn't that cause inflation if you just keep on printing money?
No, the United States is doing it. It's not causing massive inflation. Massive inflation is caused when you do quantitative easing. That is just pushing money that is printing money and pushing it into the economy. What MMT is the government borrowing money from the bank that prints the money. So no, it will not cause massive inflation because we have seen this done in the past. We're not just pushing free money into the economy. That money is made up for by the fact that a bond exists and the government has to pay it back. And there is no detriment to the government not immediately paying it back. Yes, it increases the deficit, but let me go into our benefit, just a sec. Let me go into our benefits now. It is good for the environment. It will spur innovation that other countries can use. South Korea is currently behind the world in transforming its energy system. I'm not going to take any more POIs this round. But not only will this investment help it transform its energy system and its economy to a net carbon zero economy, a 100% renewable economy, but it will create technologies through investment in the private sector that the rest of the world can use, that will be affordable for the rest of the world. And it will be good for Korea's economy in that these bonds will be profitable. My opponents keep saying that no, these bonds aren't profitable, but they haven't had any links to that, they haven't had any evidence. It is profitable for the investor. Yes, it creates a deficit for South Korea, but deficits are not an issue. Modern monetary theory states that any country that can print its own currency can continually borrow without risk of inflation and without risk to its economy. So South Korea can do this. So in the meantime, the investors not only get to put their money toward the innovation and development of new renewable technologies, but they get the tax-exempt profits from those bonds. So that encourages more investment in South Korea. And yes, also to issue this money, the government would have to issue these bonds, the government would have to print money, but they also get to have the money. They get to immediately have money to invest in renewables and in low carbon technology. I want to go back to the off case for a sec. They said the private sector runs green bonds, and they threw out there that charitable deductions are tax deductible. They haven't really provided any link as to why this is a reason not to do it. They just said people can donate to charity. That is not an argument. It is not a reason not to do this. That is not a net detriment to the plan. Yes, the private sector runs green bonds, and yes, we can further invest in the private sector technologies that we need around the world to develop a net zero carbon economy. Scientists tell us from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change that we have 10 years to radically transform our energy system and curb carbon emissions before the damage to our planet becomes irreparable. 400 species, according to National Geographic, are going extinct every single day because of increasing climate emissions. Global temperatures are rising, sea levels are rising. According to NASA, Miami will be underwater by 2100. I am not taking any more POIs this round, I'm sorry. And they solve for none of that. Not only do they not solve for Korea's economy, not only do they not have a reason other than the vague idea that deficits are bad, why our plan is bad, but they do not solve the impending threat of our climate crisis that we have 10 years to solve, 10 years before we are on a path to human extinction. So not only do we have the added benefit of this being good for Korea's economy, increasing the purchasing power of Korea's workers, bringing jobs back to a faltering economy that is seeing the slowest growth since the Great Recession, something like 0.3% a year. You know, for reference, a standard growth is like 2 to 3% per year. According to Bloomberg, South Korea's growth is horrendous, and their interest rates are down to 1.25% because of it. So by spurring this investment in the country, we can create jobs, we can increase purchasing power, we can raise the standard of life of the Korean people, and we can hit two birds with one stone by investing in renewable technology, in low carbon technology. I'm not taking any more POIs this round, I'm sorry. And radically transform the energy systems and economy of South Korea and cause innovation that will then spur to the rest of the world reducing carbon emissions and saving our planet from disaster and human extinction. So for all of these reasons, I strongly affirm the resolution that the Republic of Korea should significantly increase its financial support for green bond issuance. Thank you.
So, So I'm going to start on our case first. So firstly, they said that we don't have any warrants, especially for our first contingent about the liquidity. Firstly, they didn't refute this at all, and on top of that, we did have warrants for it, so that must flow through completely. They also said lack of specificity in how we didn't have warrants. However, we brought examples from the UK in which like money was actually being diverted from these green bonds to fund things such as like private cars or monuments. Ultimately, that the system, as we stated, is broken, and by funding more money into a broken system, which are ultimately going to be leading is that you're wasting money that could be used to help the environment. On top of that, they said in our subpoint C, and we talk about low yields and how there's like no profitability, they agreed with us. They directly stated that the government will not make no profit, and even agreed with us that the government may collapse, which I'll get onto later on in my case. And then when we talked about the status quo in which the private sector is already doing enough, and the fact of the matter is that since the private sector is doing enough right now, and on top of that, according to them, donations to the private sector and the green bonds have the same amount of value for paying taxes. That means like there's no difference between donating to a private company or buying these green bonds. So ultimately, the entire issue is non-unique. I'll answer your question at the end if I have time. So basically, the entire private sector, as you see, is what we see in the status quo, and is a better alternative because people can directly pay their money to places that they want, which is to companies that they want, rather than giving it to the money and spending the money and having the government spend money randomly. Ultimately, this was an issue in the UK when they did this because most of the investors lacked confidence in the government because they would spend the money without their consent to any companies. For example, they invested in many purchases of green bonds in the UK. They spent their money while thinking that they were going to help create like solar panels and other green energy, when in fact they actually invested in nuclear energy, which ultimately what that led to is that there was a decrease in bond purchases afterward because there's a lack of confidence in the investors. So and then on top of that, now I'm going to go on to their case, and then I'll go back and then summarize the entire case as a whole. They stated that that 30% would go to renewable, 50% would go to low carbon emissions, and the rest would go to waste management. However, as we already stated, the system's already broken. They have provided no refutations to this. All they said is that we don't have a warrant, which we did. And on top of, and then in their subpoint they said like 82% of North Korea's energy comes from fossil fuels. However, they themselves stated that North Korea is the most innovative country, and they're actually working on fixing it. So as in the issue of fossil fuels and like clean energy is fixing itself through private sectors and through the status quo. Yes.
So you said that since private charitable deductions are tax deductible, there's no difference between buying a green bond and donating to a charity. Does donating to a charity, is that profitable for anyone? Is that profitable for the person making the investment?
Well, ultimately, if you invest in a private company, for example, you can buy.
You said charity.
Wait, I'll answer your question. So no, not charity. Sorry, I messed up. So like basically, when you invest in like a private company, you can buy their bonds, which you can buy their bonds, or two, you can donate directly to them. I'll answer your question at the end if I have time. So ultimately, like the tax deductible issue is not an issue at all because both sides, in the status quo and in the affirmative, they're both tax deductible. Yes.
And when you directly invest in a private company, more information is available to you regarding your investment.
Yeah, there's more information to you, so as in there's more consumer confidence. Sorry, I'll answer your question at the end if I have time. There's more consumer confidence, and ultimately what they can do is that they can buy regular bonds, stocks in the company and gain a profit, or donate to the company directly. So ultimately, what happens is that that the tax deductible issue is not an issue at all. But even I'll answer your question at the end if I have time. But even with that, I'm still going to refute the rest of their case. And there's a major issue in their entire argument. They talk about innovation. How South Korea is the most innovative country, and they talk about like climate change and how like it will set like a good example in the world. However, the fact of the matter is that since they are the most innovative country, that ultimately would naturally lead them to already be solving the problem of the status quo. They're already investing in climate change, as we've already stated. There's already companies. 90% of the companies in the world, especially in South Korea, are actually working to manage green energy, solve for like climate change and those kind of companies. For example, there's been a study on phytoplankton in South Korea, and to actually capture like the carbon dioxide in the air by oxygen, like basically iron fertilizing them, and to actually increase like their consumption of carbon dioxide. So there's been research in South Korea, and the amount of research is ultimately growing, and also it is ultimately growing. So ultimately, their entire innovation thing, we actually turned that on our side because they're innovative in the status quo. That means that the problem is solved in the status quo. But the most important thing we need to consider is that is in their subpoint B about the economy of South Korea. They said that they currently have one of the worst economies, and that they're cutting interest rates, and right now the economy is bad. So if the economy is bad, why would they spend over $1 trillion? Over $1 trillion more just to combat climate change? Because climate change would not be the government's main issue, because right now if the interest rates are bad, it's only ultimately going to get worse. They themselves conceded that they're going to be put in deep debt. They themselves conceded that the deficit would increase 2 times. Judge, most judges in history, if a country's deficit increases by over 50%, that country is likely to fall because they ask for too much money. The interest rates to pay back to other countries and like the loans that they borrow will ultimately be too high, and they would ultimately crash. So what we see is that in the affirmative world, by buying these bonds, and this is your question at the end if I have time, by buying these bonds, ultimately they have to pay the money back, and they themselves conceded, and they cannot refute this no longer, that they themselves said that because the government will fall, there's no way to actually combat climate change. But more importantly than climate change is the government itself, because the government will ultimately shut down, because they won't be able to run, they won't be able to fund anything, and all the money that they would have would completely go to waste. So all their efforts in climate change would ultimately fall because the government would ultimately shut down as a result of like having too high deficits. So ultimately, we win on that impact entirely. They say that it doesn't matter if the government falls as long as we're helping climate change, but you can't help climate change if there's no government. That's one of the major things that they lack. And on top of that, they said like, oh, we don't have any evidence of corruption. We did. And they said like, oh, there is profitability, but it's only profitability in the people, not the government. And you can't run the plan without the government, because the government in their plan will shut down. So on top of that, they said that there will be no inflation by simply printing more money. That's how they're going to solve for all this debt. However, there's countries such as Uganda, there's countries such as Venezuela who've been printing money, and ultimately by printing money you increase inflation. This is because there's more money circulating in the economy, and what happens when you print out mass amounts of money? This happened in Germany, it's happened in Venezuela, it's happened in Uganda. Ultimately, that the notes get devalued, and the whole government and the whole economy of South Korea was shut down. That's because any money that you have in banks or any money they have in investment would be devalued and be worth nothing. That means ultimately what happens is that in their world, inflation, and they agreed with us, so that means they can no longer refute it, that inflation will go up. The government was shut down, yet somehow they're going to solve for all their environmental benefits. And because they conceded this, they can no longer refute it. So ultimately when we win, we win on the government stability, we win on non-uniqueness, because you can invest in private sectors as equally as you can do green bonds, and on top of that, the government is still alive. So ultimately, vote for the side that ultimately supports the government, and don't vote for the side that destroys the government as a whole. Yes?
So you said that investing in the private sector is just as profitable as investing in green bonds. So in what part of our plan did we say that we're making investing in the private sector tax exempt? Where is that in our plan?
No, like in the status quo, you can donate to these private sectors and get a tax deduction, or you can just buy bonds.
How is donating profitable?
Judge ready? Opponents ready? Start my time. Okay, so Judge, I'm just going to go into the same order my partner spoke and why we won today's round and summarize the debate. So, one of the biggest arguments our opponents kept making was that the negation had no warrants. Well, Judge, we did have warrants, and we provided the evidence of the UK, and we provided evidence that lots of the green bonds go towards building monuments and building company cars, and then that our opponents have cold conceded. Next, our opponents agreed with us that the government makes no profit on this, and the government goes deep into debt. I'll go more on that in like 20 seconds. Next, what we say is the private sector is on track to make change. Currently in the status quo, the private sector is on track. The private sector is a better alternative. There's more confidence in its investors. Once the UK got involved and put in bonds, investors lost confidence in the government, and it led to a decrease in bond purchases. And basically, this ties back to the fact that investors have more like research and know where they're investing if they invest directly into private companies, and that by itself creates more profitability for the investor. And next is that we also mentioned the lack of specificity. We showed that the system is broken. We showed the warrants of the UK, and we gave our arguments on why the green bonds are non-specific. And next, our opponents kept stating that South Korea is super innovative. But the fact of the matter is that even though they're just 80%, they still 80% use fossil fuels, the status quo still stands to be on track. As we stated, South Korea provided the phytoplankton research, which is essential towards solving climate change. And the fact of the matter is that this already happened, meaning this shows that the status quo is on track. The status quo will solve for these issues without the government going into collapse, the government going into chaos, and government going to deep deficit. And next, one of the biggest points in today's debate, government stability or the economy, our opponents kept repeating that the economy is bad, but why should the government go $1 trillion further in debt? The government will go into deep debt, they'll double their deficits, and in history, this has led to crashes and other huge issues. Inflation will go crazy because our opponents stated that they can just print money. The inflation will go crazy, creating a massive issue to the point that the government will be unable to even support its own people. And next, as my partner said, look at examples of Venezuela and Uganda. And next, the government is super essential to its people. The government is super essential to the country even existing. Without the government, there is no investments that can be made. And our opponents kept bringing up the fact that quality of life will go up, people have more purchasing power. But Judge, how can this happen if money has been devalued? The fact is, when you print money the value of the money goes down. And all the money that these people are holding, the value will go down. People lose the power that they have. And if the government goes down, people lose even further quality of life. So on that argument, we believe the negation has won. And next, going to some voter issues. One, let's go into the topic of the environment. The private sector is on track to solve climate change. And basically, either donations or investment in these private companies will lead to a better benefit because people will know what they're investing in. People will know that they will get a profit. People will know that the company will make definite change. So basically, and so their benefits of tax exemptions are mitigated and outweighed by the fact that the government will collapse and go into chaos. And so
by the donations and like stocks.
right. So basically, donations and stocks and bonds are
Like-
donations and bonds.
Like in status quo, private sectors.
Right. Yeah. No. In the status quo, basically investing in the private sector directly is not equal to bonds. Why? Because people have more confidence and people will make more money in a definitive manner and will cause change. And next, finally, I would like to end my speech by saying that without the government, that there is no plan. The plan cannot carry out. It will lead to anarchy. It will lead to a worsened environment, and it will lead to further issues. And for all these reasons, I negate.
Alright, I'm first going to talk about the whole point about the economy and basically the government collapsing. Okay, they seem to not understand my partner's entire point about how this is like not pushing money into the economy. This is just borrowing money from the Fed, from the central bank. They seem to not understand this monetary policy. We're not just pushing money out into the economy. That's like what Venezuela or Uganda happens, where they just print money and push it to the economy. No, the whole point that he made was that the central bank lends money to the government. The government is borrowing money from the bank. We're not printing money and pushing it into the economy. And like they can see the example that the United States is literally doing it right now. The United States has $22 trillion worth of debt right now, and do we see a giant economic collapse of the entire United States? Government ceasing to exist right now? No. And this increase in debt in South Korea is just going to be minimal compared to this giant debt the United States has. And I get the United States is a bigger country, but still it's far more proportional than South Korea. And furthermore, we can see that like this is just a really good example as to why this policy doesn't just create instant inflation. It's because the Federal Reserve is actually just lending to the government, and the government is borrowing, not pushing money out of it. There's a big difference, and that's why there's no inflation happening in the United States right now. That's why it's going to be a pretty minimal effect on the government. But furthermore, this is all completely worth it because the government is using all this money, where all the money they're losing is going and investing in business, investing into these businesses which are going to create innovation, which are going to create basically the solution to climate change. So that's why, first of all, it's absolutely worth it. And second of all, there's no real impact of like having more debt. Like the United States has so much debt right now, and the solution that South Korea is could do is literally what the United States is doing right now. They didn't really respond to this at all. They didn't really understand it. So this point doesn't really make sense. So now going into the biggest single voting issue in this round, which is the environment. It's the most important, highest magnitude. Like literally, mass extinction is on the line, and you have to vote on this. Okay, to go on to why they don't solve. They keep talking about the private sector and how it's how it's going to solve. First of all, first they said, is charity tax deductible? And I said, yeah, but then they tried to say that like investments into the private sector is tax deductible, which absolutely makes no sense. They switched up on the words, but they basically the idea is that investing into the private sector is completely, you have to pay taxes on whatever profit you make from investing in the private sector. This is completely not relevant. The second reason why is that it's not profitable. Like you don't have a guaranteed profit if you invest into a private company. There's no reason that you know that you're not just going to lose all your money. So that's why it's really hard to invest in the private sector. That's why there's no innovation happening in the private sector right now. But with these environmental bonds, you have a guaranteed, a slip of paper that guarantees you your money back. So it's 100% profitable buying bonds, but you have no idea what's going to happen if you invest your money in the private sector. The company could fall. You have no source of profitability there. Furthermore, like with our plan, they seem to forget that our plan is actually helping the private sector too, because the government is investing in these businesses with the consumers' money, which they buy on a bond. So basically, we're helping for the private sector. So, and even if you believe that the private sector is good, we help the private sector. But the only way to help the private sector is with all these bonds, which guarantee people are actually going to invest in them, because in the status quo, we don't see enough people investing into the private sector, and that's why there's not enough innovation. So, first of all, in the status quo, you can't believe that it's going to solve. Like South Korea, even being the most innovative economy, still gets 80% of their stuff from fossil fuels. So there's no way that they think that there's going to be able to solve within the 10 years we have to save the planet. Furthermore, if you go with our plan, we have guaranteed profitability, guaranteed investment into people that are actually going to invest in these private companies. So we have the only way to actually solve for this issue, and the only way to actually create stuff. So the status quo does not solve all this. The private sector does not solve unless you go with our plan, decrease tax, or basically make it tax deductible, and then incentivize investment.
Pause time. The fact that private sector does not solve is a new argument. We stated this.
We've been making this argument my entire uniqueness under my second contention was. My entire uniqueness under the first contention was that the private sector is not going to solve. We take it into consideration, but we've been really talking about it the whole debate. Okay, so now to go into why, like a little bit more into why we actually saw, like there is guaranteed profit, like I said. Now they keep talking about how it's not clear and it's a broken system, but we literally gave this statistic where like South Korea, like the government reported where all its bonds had been going. It was like 30% into renewable energy, 50% into like creating low carbon solutions. So basically, it's transparent. Like we know where all our stuff is going. It's not like unclear. They don't know where it's going to go. It's like you buy a bond and you can see exactly what the government is doing. They gave this report, which I gave them. They didn't really respond to that.
Can we go to pause time? The fact that like they can directly track like where the money's going and there's like no corruption is also a new argument. You had a chance to respond when you talk about corruption.
I gave that like statistic in my first speech. That's pretty much the same analysis I gave. Whatever. I'll keep going. So basically, this basically creates innovation. This is the only hope to like stimulating more innovation, which is our only hope at like solving climate change. Like only takes like one really big idea solution to solve all the climate change, and it's likely going to come out of South Korea only if we go with this plan and incentivize investment into these green tech companies, which is our only chance of solving for climate change. So basically, now to weigh some impacts. Like I said, the single most important impact you have to weigh in this round is solving for the environment, solving for climate change, solving for mass extinction, solving for like basically sea levels rising, tons of people dying, tons of people being displaced. This is the biggest impact, carries more magnitude than anything else. Now, even if you like don't buy the plan that it's going to solve for that, they still have no offense in solving this impact whatsoever. No part of the plan takes away from the private sector solving the impact. So that's even if the plan does nothing. But they have no offense. But we can clearly see that the plan does a huge amount. It's the only hope at solving for this idea of climate change. It's the only hope of stimulating this like potential innovation hiding within South Korea. This is only going to happen if we go with this investment, go with this incentive. Like I said, business investment is like at all-time low in South Korea. There's no currently investment into innovation. So we need to have this big incentive to stimulate investment, stimulate people to actually buy these bonds, and therefore stimulate investment into these businesses, which is our only hope at solving climate change. Judge, on this really enormous voting issue, we have like a solid voting issue, solid contention explaining detailing why this will happen, but they have absolutely no offense on this. So when you weigh the impacts, it's pretty clear that we have won the round just on this issue of climate change. And yes, for these reasons, I strongly urge a vote for the affirmation.